Her ex-husband mocked her in court, but when she spoke, the judge was stunned. The morning was supposed to be like any other. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, the distant hum of city traffic echoed through the windows, and the usual chaos of preparing breakfast for the children played out. But when she reached the front door and found an envelope resting on the welcome mat, everything shifted. It wasn't a bill, a letter from a friend, or a misplaced piece of junk mail. It was a legal document, a divorce summons. Her hands trembled as she tore it open, her heart pounding with a mix of confusion and dread. The words on the paper blurred before her eyes, but one sentence stood out with brutal clarity: irreconcilable differences. The petitioner seeks full control over marital assets and property. Her stomach twisted as she read further. Her husband, the man she had stood by for over a decade, wasn't just leaving her, he was erasing her. He was claiming she had contributed nothing to their shared life, that she had been nothing more than an idle presence in their home. The summons painted her as a dependent, a woman who had lived off his hard work, adding no value of her own. Anger surged through her veins, a deep, raw fury that came not just from betrayal but from the sheer injustice of it. How could he? After all she had sacrificed? She heard the sound of the garage door opening. He was home early. She rushed to the front hallway, still clutching the papers. When he walked in, he barely looked at her. "So, you got it," he said flatly, setting down his briefcase. "It's time, Anna. This marriage is over." "Over?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "And you think you can just erase everything I've done for this family? You're taking everything, Daniel?" He scoffed. "You didn't earn anything, Anna. You were just there. This house. The money? My career? All mine. You'll get a fair settlement, but don't expect more than that. I have a future to think about." The days leading up to the first hearing passed in a haze. Anna barely ate, barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's cold, indifferent expression, the way he had dismissed her as if she were nothing more than a fleeting inconvenience. She had spent years supporting his ambitions, raising their children, managing every aspect of their home while he built his empire. And now, he wanted to walk away, pretending she had been nothing more than a shadow in the background. Her lawyer, a calm and calculated woman named Margaret, reviewed the case with precision. "He's claiming full ownership of your home, your shared savings, even the retirement funds," Margaret said, flipping through the documents. "He's arguing that since you were a homemaker, you had no financial stake in any of it." Anna clenched her fists. "But that's not true. I managed the accounts, I handled the household expenses, I supported him while he built his company." Margaret nodded. "Yes. But proving that is going to take more than just your word." When the court date arrived, Anna walked into the courtroom with her head high, but her heart pounded. Daniel sat on the other side, his expensive lawyer beside him, the air of smug confidence dripping from every glance he threw her way. He didn't even look nervous. He expected to win. As Anna sat through the initial proceedings, memories of her marriage played out in her mind. She had met Daniel in college when he was nothing more than a young man with big dreams and no direction. She had been the one who encouraged him to take risks, the one who stayed up late helping him draft business proposals, the one who worked extra shifts when his first startup failed so they wouldn't lose their tiny apartment. When his second business finally took off, he had promised her that their sacrifices had been worth it. "We did this together," he had told her, holding her hand in their first real home. "But somewhere along the way, that we had disappeared." When he started making real money, his priorities changed. He spent less time at home, started seeing her as less of a partner and more of a background character in his success story. He hired financial advisors, assistants, and accountants, but it was Anna who had balanced the checkbooks, ensured the taxes were paid, and managed their growing wealth. And now, he wanted to pretend none of that had happened. Daniel's voice pulled her back to the present. Anna was a homemaker, he said, his tone condescending as he spoke to the judge. She had no role in my business. She never worked. She never contributed to our financial success. Anna's breath caught in her throat as quiet murmurs rippled through the courtroom. He was doing it, he was erasing her. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle. The betrayal ran deeper than his infidelity or his dismissal of her sacrifices. He wanted the world to believe she had been useless, irrelevant. He wanted to humiliate her. That night, after the hearing adjourned, Anna sat alone in her bedroom, going through old files. Years of tax documents, investment papers, legal contracts, things she had handled while Daniel was off making deals. She had been meticulous, keeping everything in order, never letting a single bill go unpaid. And then, her fingers stopped on a particular document. It was an old agreement, one she had forgotten about. A signed contract stating that Anna had been a financial manager in his business's early days, a role she had taken on unofficially but had been recognized in legal paperwork Daniel had clearly hoped would stay buried. A slow, determined smile spread across her lips. He had underestimated her. The next court session was even worse. Daniel smirked as his lawyer painted Anna as a woman who had coasted through life, living luxuriously on his hard work. "Your Honor," his attorney said with a smirk, "Mrs. Carter was a housewife. She has no claim to Mr. Carter's business, his wealth, or his assets. We are prepared to settle generously, but let's not pretend she contributed in any meaningful way." Daniel chuckled, leaning toward her. "Just accept it, Anna. This is how the world works." Anna's heart pounded, but she refused to let him see her falter. She tightened her grip on the folder in her lap. "Actually," she said, her voice calm but firm, "Your Honor, I have something to clarify." The judge glanced up, intrigued. "Proceed." Anna rose to her feet, her eyes locked onto Daniel's. She took a slow breath, then placed the document on the table. "This is a signed contract," she said, her voice steady, "proving that I was not just a housewife, I was a financial manager in my husband's company during its critical years. And I have the documentation to prove that without me, his business would not exist as it does today." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Daniel's smirk disappeared. His lawyer's confidence wavered. And for the first time since this battle began, Anna saw something new in her husband's eyes. Fear. The judge leaned forward, studying the document with newfound interest. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating, the air thick with tension. Daniel shifted in his seat, his usual smugness fading into something closer to unease. His lawyer took the paper, eyes darting across the page, and for the first time even he seemed rattled. Anna kept her posture straight, refusing to waver under the weight of the moment. This was just the beginning. The years she had spent being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as invisible had built up to this confrontation. "Mrs. Carter," the judge finally said, tapping a pen against the desk, "this document states that you were an integral part of Mr. Carter's financial management during the formative years of his company. Are you stating that you had an active role in the business's success?" Anna met the judge's gaze, her voice unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor. I handled budgeting, tax planning, and financial forecasting for years. I ensured the business stayed afloat while it was still struggling. I was never compensated, but my work was essential. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Daniel clenched his jaw, his lawyer flipping through his notes, trying to salvage what was quickly becoming an unraveling case. Daniel's lawyer stood, attempting to dismiss Anna's claim. Your Honor, while this document exists, we must question its significance. Handling household expenses does not equate to business management. Many spouses offer emotional support or basic assistance, but that does not entitle them to company assets. The argument was sharp, but Anna was prepared. She took a deep breath, pulling out more files. These are spreadsheets, emails, and tax filings that bear my name. I was responsible for these records, and they are critical financial documents. I was not merely balancing grocery lists, I was managing corporate accounts, structuring financial plans, and ensuring the business met regulatory compliance. The judge examined the documents, his expression unreadable. I see. And Mr. Carter, do you dispute these? Daniel sat rigid, his fingers tapping against the table. His confidence was slipping, the arrogance in his demeanor now cracking under the weight of undeniable proof. I don't recall, he muttered. It was a weak response, and Anna could see it for what it was, a desperate attempt to downplay her contributions. But the judge wasn't fooled. Then we will review these records carefully before making a decision, he said, turning to the court clerk. For now, we proceed with the division of assets. Daniel's jaw clenched, and for the first time, Anna saw the panic in his eyes. The battle was far from over. Over the next few hearings, Daniel's team tried every strategy to discredit her. They claimed her involvement had been casual, that she had merely helped out without playing a true managerial role. But every time they tried to minimize her, Anna countered with another document, another email, another undeniable piece of proof. Each submission painted a clearer picture. She had not just been his wife, she had been a fundamental part of his success. And yet, he had chosen to disregard her, assuming she would remain silent, powerless in the face of his wealth. Daniel's frustration grew visible with each passing day. His lawyer became more aggressive, trying to push Anna into contradictions. But she remained steady. Mr. Carter, her lawyer said during one heated cross-examination, if your wife had no role in your finances, why does her signature appear on multiple financial agreements? Daniel stammered, struggling to form a coherent response. She was just there. I asked her to sign things for convenience. It was a weak lie, one that even his own lawyer seemed to regret. Anna allowed herself a small, quiet breath of victory. The tide was turning. Outside the courtroom, Anna felt the weight of it all pressing on her. Each session drained her, forcing her to relive years of being pushed aside. She hadn't expected Daniel's cruelty to cut this deep, but the real wound came from knowing how easily he had dismissed her. He hadn't even hesitated. As she sat alone in her lawyer's office, Margaret placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're doing incredibly well, Anna. You've backed him into a corner. But we have to stay sharp, he won't go down without a fight. Anna nodded, though exhaustion settled into her bones. The financial side of the case was progressing, but the emotional scars ran deeper than any legal battle. She thought of their children, of the home she had built, of the years she had dedicated to making a life with Daniel. And now, he wanted to erase it all. No, she refused to let him. This wasn't just about money. This was about standing up for herself, proving that she had never been just a housewife. She had been a partner, and she would not allow him to rewrite history. When the next hearing began, Daniel was emboldened, regaining some of his lost confidence. "Your Honor," his lawyer began, his voice laced with condescension, "Mrs. Carter is attempting to take credit for things she never truly had control over. While she may have had some minor involvement, the reality is that Mr. Carter built his company on his own. The financial success was his alone." Daniel smirked, watching Anna as if daring her to crumble. Anna remained calm, though the sting of his words burned deep. She met the judge's eyes. "I have another piece of evidence," she said, placing a thick binder on the table. The room quieted as she flipped through pages, detailed reports, financial projections, loan applications, all in her handwriting. "This," she continued, her voice unwavering, "is the financial model I built when the company was first struggling. It was the foundation of our investment strategy. Without it, there would be no success." The judge examined the files, nodding slightly. Daniel's smirk faltered. For the first time, it was clear Anna wasn't going to be silenced. The weight of her evidence was undeniable, and Daniel knew it. His jaw tightened as the judge carefully reviewed the financial reports Anna had presented. The courtroom was silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Anna remained composed, but inside, she was reliving the countless nights she had spent at their kitchen table, crunching numbers while Daniel was off networking at expensive galas. The irony was painful. He had used her skills to build his empire, yet he had convinced himself she had done nothing. Daniel's lawyer cleared his throat, trying to maintain control. "Your Honor, even if these reports were written by Mrs. Carter, there is no concrete proof that she played an active role in financial decisions. Many spouses assist in minor ways without being true contributors." The judge raised an eyebrow. Minor ways? Mr. Carter's business depended on securing loans in its early years, correct? Daniel hesitated before nodding. "Then explain why Mrs. Carter's financial models were used in those applications." The color drained from Daniel's face. He had no answer. That evening, Anna received an unexpected message from someone she hadn't spoken to in years, one of Daniel's former business partners. He had been quietly following the case and had something to say. "I need to tell you the truth," he said when they met at a small cafe. "Back when we were struggling to get investors, it was your financial forecasts that saved us." Daniel never admitted it, but we all knew. "We built this company off your work, Anna." His words were a validation she had longed for, but they also deepened the betrayal. She pressed for details, and he provided them willingly. "I remember when we presented to the bank," he continued. Daniel was nervous. He barely understood the financials, but you? You had prepared every projection. You were the one who made the case for why we were a viable investment. Anna clenched her fists. Daniel had stolen her contributions, buried them under his name, and now he was trying to erase her completely. But now she had a witness. She had proof. And she was ready to use it. With renewed determination, Anna worked tirelessly with her lawyer to compile every scrap of evidence proving her involvement. She dug through years of emails, business correspondence, and financial statements. Each document painted a clear picture. She had been more than just a wife. She had been a strategist, an analyst, a force behind the scenes that had kept everything afloat. And Daniel had known it all along. He had simply chosen to pretend otherwise. Margaret was impressed. "This isn't just supporting evidence," she said. This is irrefutable. We're not just proving you had a role. We're proving that without you, Daniel's success wouldn't exist. Anna felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. She had spent years in the shadows, believing that one day Daniel would acknowledge her sacrifices. Now, instead of receiving gratitude, she was forced to fight for her own legacy. But she would do it. She owed it to herself. When they returned to court, Anna was ready. She walked in with her head high, her presence no longer timid. Daniel, however, looked less certain. His lawyer had undoubtedly told him how bad things were about to get. The proceedings resumed, and Margaret stood to address the court. Your Honor, we have a witness, a former business associate of Mr. Carter, who is prepared to testify that Mrs. Carter's financial expertise was instrumental in the company's early success. The judge nodded, intrigued. Daniel's lawyer immediately objected, but the judge allowed it. The former partner took the stand, recounting in detail how Anna had created the business projections, prepared financial statements, and reassured investors when Daniel himself had been too uncertain to speak. Without her, the company would have collapsed in its first 2 years, the witness concluded. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Daniel sat rigid, his confidence crumbling with each word. The judge turned to Daniel. Mr. Carter, do you dispute this testimony? Daniel's face was pale, his fingers gripping the table. He opened his mouth but hesitated. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. I don't recall it that way, he muttered, but it was weak. No one believed him. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably, sensing the case slipping away. Anna remained quiet, her hands steady in her lap. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was speaking for itself. Margaret pressed forward. Your Honor, I would also like to submit an email exchange between Mr. Carter and an investor in which he acknowledges that his wife handles all financial planning and that she is the best person to explain our growth model. The document was displayed for the courtroom, and Daniel visibly stiffened. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Carter, this is your email. Do you deny writing it? He had no escape. I must have forgotten, he mumbled. The lie was obvious, and the damage was done. The judge's patience was wearing thin. Mr. Carter, he said, his tone firm, your claims that Mrs. Carter played no role in your company's financial success are inconsistent with the evidence before us. Your testimony is becoming increasingly unreliable. Daniel's lawyer tried to intervene, but the judge held up a hand. We will continue with asset division, and I will personally ensure that Mrs. Carter's contributions are recognized in the settlement. A sharp intake of breath filled the room. Daniel's worst fear had materialized, his attempt to erase Anna had backfired spectacularly. He shifted in his seat, his once cocky demeanor now replaced by growing panic. Anna met his eyes, and for the first time in years, she saw something unfamiliar in them, respect, though it was laced with bitterness. But it was too late for him now. The damage was done. And she wasn't finished yet. Anna sat in the courtroom, her expression calm but her mind racing. She had expected Daniel to fight hard, but the desperation in his lawyer's voice confirmed that they were losing control. She reached into her files and retrieved another critical piece of evidence, one that would make his case collapse completely. Your Honor, she began, standing with confidence, I would like to present documentation of my personal investments in my husband's company. When he had no capital, I used my own savings to fund the business's early operations. This includes covering payroll, securing office space, and even making initial supplier payments. Daniel's lawyer immediately objected, but the judge raised a hand to silence him. "Let me see those documents," he said. The clerk took the papers to the bench, and a tense silence filled the room as the judge scanned through them. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming against the table. "These transactions show direct financial contributions from Mrs. Carter," the judge finally said, looking up. "Mr. Carter, were these funds ever repaid?" Daniel swallowed hard, his mouth opening slightly before he shut it again. He had no answer. There was no record of repayment, because he had never intended to acknowledge her role. Margaret seized the moment. "Your Honor, this evidence confirms that my client was not just a supportive spouse, she was an investor and a silent partner. If Mr. Carter refuses to recognize that, then he is effectively guilty of financial deception. She was never compensated, never given credit, and now he wants to take everything while pretending she did nothing." Daniel's face was stone, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his panic. The realization that Anna had him cornered was sinking in, and there was no way out. The judge leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharp. "Mrs. Carter, are you seeking a legal declaration of partnership in the company's foundation?" Anna took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of silence lifting. "Yes, Your Honor. I am not here to take what isn't mine, I am here to claim what I rightfully built." A murmur spread across the courtroom as the implications set in. This was no longer a simple divorce settlement. Anna had just positioned herself as a true stakeholder in Daniel's empire, and everyone knew it. During recess, Daniel stormed out of the courtroom, his footsteps echoing with frustration. Anna remained seated, keeping her expression unreadable, but she could feel the shift in the air. He had underestimated her, convinced she would quietly accept his version of events. Instead, she had stood firm, and now he was the one floundering. Margaret leaned toward her, speaking in a hushed tone. "He's unraveling. He didn't expect you to have this much leverage." When the session resumed, Daniel's lawyer attempted a last-minute strategy shift. "Your Honor, my client is willing to offer a generous settlement to resolve this matter without further litigation." Anna's pulse quickened. This was a clear sign of surrender. But she had learned her lesson. Daniel's generosity always came with conditions. Margaret stood, her voice unwavering. "We appreciate the offer, but given the extent of Mrs. Carter's contributions, we believe a full ruling is necessary." The judge nodded in agreement. Daniel's ploy to control the damage had failed, and he knew it. Anna took the stand, not just to defend herself but to reclaim her story. "For years, I worked behind the scenes while my husband built his business. I balanced our accounts, prepared financial projections, and handled crises that could have destroyed us. I was not a passive observer, I was a partner. And yet, when the success finally came, I was discarded as if I had never mattered." Her voice didn't waver, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. Even Daniel couldn't meet her eyes. She turned toward the judge, her next words deliberate. "This is not just about me. This is about every woman who has ever been told that her contributions don't count because they weren't made in a boardroom. It is about fairness, justice, and refusing to let history be rewritten by those who benefit from our silence." The courtroom was utterly still. Even those who had come expecting a routine divorce hearing were now captivated. Anna wasn't just fighting for herself, she was exposing a truth too many had ignored. The trial neared its conclusion, but Daniel wasn't finished trying to manipulate the outcome. "I built that company," he snapped during a recess, his voice low and filled with barely contained rage. "It's my legacy. Anna met his glare, unfazed. "And I built it with you," she countered. "With my expertise, my time, my sacrifices. That's the part of your legacy you refuse to acknowledge." His jaw tightened, his frustration evident. He wasn't just losing in court, he was losing control over the narrative he had so carefully constructed. When the hearing resumed, the judge's tone was firm. "Mr. Carter, the court has reviewed the evidence extensively. Your claims that Mrs. Carter played no role in your financial success are inconsistent with the facts. Your testimony has been unreliable, and your attempts to dismiss her involvement lack merit. We will now proceed with the final judgment." Daniel tensed. Anna remained still. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Daniel's legal team was in shambles. Every argument they had prepared, every attempt to discredit Anna, had collapsed under the weight of evidence. His lawyer tried one final time. "Your Honor, we maintain that while Mrs. Carter may have contributed in small ways, it does not entitle her to a significant share of the business." But the judge had heard enough. He shook his head, clearly unimpressed. "The evidence before this court suggests otherwise. It is clear that Mrs. Carter was instrumental in the company's foundation and growth." Daniel exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the table. He had lost, and now it was only a matter of how much he would lose. The judge turned toward Anna. "Mrs. Carter, based on the documents provided and testimony given, you are entitled to a substantial portion of the business assets. The court also acknowledges your financial investments, which must be repaid in full with interest. In addition, given the clear attempt to mislead this court, you will receive additional compensation for damages." Daniel's face turned ashen. Anna remained composed, but inside, she felt something she hadn't in years: vindication. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of the judge's decision sinking in. Daniel's lawyer sat rigid, flipping through his papers as if searching for some last-minute loophole. But there was none. The ruling had been made, and there was no escaping it. Daniel's hands were clenched into fists, his jaw locked tight. His entire demeanor had shifted. Gone was the confident, dismissive man who had once scoffed at Anna's presence in court. Now, he was just a man stripped of his illusions, exposed for what he truly was. The judge adjusted his glasses and continued. "In addition to asset division, this court recognizes that Mrs. Carter's financial contributions played a significant role in the company's success. Therefore, she will not only receive a direct financial settlement but also be entitled to a percentage of future profits from the business she helped build." A gasp rippled through the room. Daniel shot up from his chair, his composure finally breaking. "You can't do that," he barked. "That company is mine." The judge didn't flinch. "Sit down, Mr. Carter," he ordered, his tone sharp. "This is my ruling, and you will respect this court." Daniel fell back into his chair, his face flushed with anger, but he knew he had lost. After the verdict, Anna gathered her belongings, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She had won, but it didn't erase the years of sacrifice, the years of being unseen. As she turned to leave, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to find one of Daniel's former business partners approaching her, a hesitant but sincere expression on his face. "Anna," he said, shifting awkwardly. "I just wanted to say. I should have spoken up sooner." She studied him carefully. "You knew," she said quietly. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. He nodded, shame flickering across his features. "We all knew. You were the one who kept the company afloat in those first few years. You were the one who made it happen. Daniel just took the credit. Anna let out a slow breath. It wasn't exactly news, but hearing it confirmed aloud was still a bitter pill to swallow. Why didn't you ever say anything? She asked. The man sighed. Loyalty, I suppose. Fear of losing my job. But watching him try to erase you like this, it was wrong. I'm sorry. Anna gave him a small nod. It's too late for apologies, she said, but at least the truth is out now. Daniel stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyer struggling to keep up with him. The reporters outside immediately swarmed, their cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward his face. Mr. Carter, do you have any comments on the ruling? How do you feel about losing such a significant portion of your assets? Did you underestimate your wife's role in the company? His face was red with fury, but he said nothing. He pushed past them, his once carefully curated public image shattered in an instant. Anna watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. She didn't take joy in his suffering, but she also felt no sympathy. He had done this to himself. He had assumed she would remain silent, that she would accept whatever scraps he tossed her way. But she hadn't. And now, he was the one walking away humiliated, powerless in a way he had never expected. Margaret stepped beside her, crossing her arms. Well, that was satisfying, she murmured. Anna gave a small smile. It was justice, she corrected. Nothing more, nothing less. A few weeks later, the final paperwork was completed. The financial settlement was substantial, more than Anna had anticipated. But it wasn't just about the money. She now had a rightful stake in the company's future earnings, something Daniel had tried so desperately to deny her. It was a permanent acknowledgement that she had mattered, that her work had been real. Daniel, on the other hand, had been left scrambling, forced to restructure his business under the weight of the losses. The press had caught wind of the case, and while Anna had chosen to stay out of the spotlight, the same couldn't be said for Daniel. His reputation had taken a significant hit. Investors were wary. Employees whispered. The empire he had so carefully built on half-truths and arrogance was crumbling. Anna sat in her lawyer's office, reviewing the final documents. This is everything, Margaret said, sliding the last contract toward her. Once you sign this, it's officially over. Anna picked up the pen, hesitating for only a moment. Then, with steady hands, she signed. It was over. The battle, the marriage, the years of being unrecognized, it had all led to this moment. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free. The morning was quiet, the sun spilling golden light across her new apartment. She had moved into a space of her own, a home that was truly hers. No longer was she living in the shadow of someone else's success. This was her chance to start over, to build something for herself without anyone else taking credit. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stared out at the city below, the future stretching before her like an open road. She had spent years believing that her worth was tied to someone else's achievements, that her sacrifices would one day be acknowledged. But she had been wrong. She didn't need Daniel's approval. She didn't need anyone's validation. She had proven her value in court, but more importantly, she had proven it to herself. She had fought for her legacy, for her dignity, and she had won. And now, for the first time in years, she was finally looking forward, not back. Months passed, and Anna settled into her new life. She had taken an advisory role in a startup, using the very skills that Daniel had once dismissed. It was ironic, after all these years, she was finally doing for herself what she had spent so long doing for someone else. And she was thriving. One afternoon, she received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was from Daniel. "We need to talk." She stared at the screen, then simply deleted the message. There was nothing left to say. She had already won the most important battle, the one within herself. She had spent too many years giving away her power, waiting for someone else to validate her worth. But she didn't need his acknowledgement anymore. She had built her own life, and she wasn't looking back. She stepped outside, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. The world was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly, completely free. One evening, she sat in a quiet cafe, flipping through the pages of a business journal. Her story had made waves in the industry. It had sparked conversations about the role spouses play in business, about the unseen labor that so often goes uncredited. She had been contacted by women in similar situations, thanking her for fighting back, for setting a precedent. It was strange, she had never set out to be a symbol of resilience. She had only wanted what was fair. But if her fight had helped others, then maybe everything she had endured had been worth it. She sipped her coffee, a small smile playing on her lips. The past no longer haunted her. The pain, the betrayal, the courtroom battles, they were just chapters in a book that she had already finished. And now, she was writing something new. Years later, as she walked through the halls of her new company, she felt something she had once thought was lost: pride. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up, turning her skills into something undeniable. No one would ever question her worth again. And Daniel? He was just a faded memory, a lesson learned but no longer needed. She had won, not just in court, but in life. And that was the greatest victory of all.